Snow drifted across the open platform, gathering in the corners like forgotten thoughts. The little station creaked under the weight of winter, its roof sagging beneath a shroud of white, lanterns sputtering as the wind clawed at their flames. Chenoa stood near the wooden bench, her trunk at her side, her shawl drawn close around her rounded frame. She had been standing for hours, though time had folded into something shapeless, measured only by the sting of the cold in her cheeks and the ache in her feet. The townsfolk had gathered not out of kindness, but curiosity. In a place where gossip was as nourishing as bread, her presence was a feast. Men leaned against posts, smirking, spitting tobacco into the snow. Women whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes sharp as needles. "Too fat to be chosen," one murmured, the words riding the wind like arrows. Another said, "A woman like that, bound to die alone." Each comment pressed into her skin like thorns. Chenoa lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear, though her ears burned. Her mother used to say that silence was a shield, but silence, she had learned, could also be a wound. The rejection had followed her from town to town. Suitors glanced once, then twice, then moved along, as if her very flesh declared her unworthy of a place at a man's table. Now, stranded here with no ticket home, she wondered if perhaps they had been right all along. A sharp gust rattled the station, carrying with it the echo of hooves. Heads turned. The crowd shifted uneasily, curiosity giving way to something quieter, wary respect. A rider emerged from the wall of snow, horse steaming, mane frosted. Upon its back sat a man who looked carved from the wilderness itself. He was shirtless, though the storm raged, his skin bronzed and scarred, long black hair whipped by the wind. Muscles rippled across his chest, each scar telling of battles fought, none spoken. His eyes, dark, unflinching, swept the gathering until they found her. The crowd fell silent. Even the jeers froze, caught in the throats of men who moments before had laughed the loudest. Chenoa's heart stumbled in her chest. She did not know this man, yet his gaze pierced through her as though he had always known her. The weight of his presence was too much. She turned her face, clutching the shawl tighter. But the sound of boots on wood drew nearer, heavy, certain. The man dismounted without a word. The station mistress, Mrs. Hargreave, made a nervous sign with her hands, muttering about "savages" under her breath, though not loudly enough to be heard by him. He walked through the parting crowd, each step deliberate, each breath visible in the frozen air. When he stopped before Chenoa, the world seemed to tilt. She tried to summon her voice, to ask what he wanted, but only silence came. He looked down at her trunk, then at her trembling hands, and then, without asking, he lifted the trunk as though it were no heavier than a loaf of bread. His voice, when it came, was low, steady, carrying the weight of earth and storm alike. "You're coming with me." It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was a verdict. The crowd erupted with whispers. What's he want with her? A giant like him, taking her? Shameful. Madness. Laughter tried to rise again, but it faltered under the man's steady presence. Even Jedediah Cole, who mocked louder than most, shifted uneasily, spitting into the snow without meeting the Apache's eyes. Chenoa's lips parted, but no sound came. Her world had always been marked by rejection. Never had someone claimed her. Not like this, not before witnesses who had branded her unworthy. She should have been frightened, yet something within her, fragile as a candle flame, flickered toward him. Still, shame was quicker than hope. She stammered, I can't. But the words froze on her tongue. His hand extended, palm broad, calloused, waiting. When she did not take it, he did not withdraw. He simply waited, the snow settling on his hair, melting on the heat of his skin. She thought of the rooms she had been turned away from, the suitors who looked through her as if she were air, the hollow nights where only her own breathing kept her company. The station's laughter pressed at her back like a whip. Before her stood a man who asked for nothing but her presence, and somehow that was more than anyone else had ever given. Her fingers lifted, hesitant, trembling. The crowd gasped as her hand met his. His grip closed, firm, unyielding, steadying her as though she were no burden at all. With one motion, he turned from the station, leading her through the snow. She stumbled once, nearly falling, but his arms steadied her without pause. The murmurs behind them grew louder, bitter, furious. Mrs. Hargreave called after her. "You'll regret it, girl. You'll regret it sure as sin." But the words scattered in the storm, weak against the sound of hooves stamping, and the man's silent stride. As they stepped into the vast whiteness, Chenoa's breath hitched. For the first time, she was not left behind. She was being taken forward, into something unknown. Fear braided with wonder. The snow closed around them like a veil, hiding the station from sight, hiding the jeers, hiding the shame. The cold bit her cheeks, but the warmth of his hand seeped into her bones, stronger than fire. She did not know his name. She did not know why he had chosen her. She only knew the crowd was gone, the station behind her, and before her stretched a wilderness where anything could be rewritten. The wind howled, drowning the last of the laughter. She looked once over her shoulder, but there was nothing now. No station, no faces, no judgment. Only the white storm swallowing the world. Beside her, his voice came again, softer this time, almost like a vow carried on the snow. "You will not be alone." Her breath caught. The storm thickened, the path ahead vanishing into shadow, and she realized with a start that she was stepping into a life she had never imagined. One that might cost her everything, yet might at last give her something she had never dared believe she deserved. The trail wound upward through the storm, the pines bending beneath their burden of snow, whispering like old witnesses to something sacred or forbidden. Chenoa's breath came in uneven clouds, each step sinking into drifts that threatened to swallow her skirts. The man, her captor, her rescuer, she did not know which, walked ahead with the steadiness of one born to the wilderness. His bare chest gleamed with sweat despite the cold, his muscles rolling like living stone beneath scarred skin. The horse followed, trunk lashed to its back, snorting against the cold. Chenoa's shawl clung damp against her, her hands numb beneath the wool, yet still she kept moving. Her hand remained locked in his, until at last he released her to climb a steep ridge. She stumbled, caught herself, then felt his grip return, wordless, steady, commanding her onward. By the time they reached the cabin, her legs trembled, skirts heavy with snow, lungs raw from the climb. It stood in a clearing of pines, dark timbers half buried, roof laden thick with white. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint, uncertain, like a breath fighting not to vanish. He pushed the door wide, guiding her inside before the storm could follow. The air within smelled of pine resin and smoke, faintly of leather and ash. Shadows leapt along the walls where animal pelts hung, their glass eyes reflecting firelight. In the corner, a low bed covered with furs. Against the wall, a table scarred by years of use. He set her trunk down with a single motion, then crouched by the hearth. With practiced hands he coaxed new life from the coals, adding wood until flames leapt high, painting his skin in molten gold. Heat spread slowly, thawing her face, making her aware of how violently she was shivering. She sank onto a stool, arms crossed against herself, ashamed at the way her teeth rattled. He glanced once at her, then turned away, rummaging through shelves. Soon he placed before her a rough-hewn bowl of stew, steam rising in fragrant spirals. Venison, roots, herbs, nothing grand, yet more than she had eaten in days. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but shame pinned her hands in her lap. She could feel his eyes though he said nothing. She imagined him watching, measuring, as all others did, wondering how much she might consume, how much her body betrayed her. He must have sensed it, for after a moment he rose and crossed the room. Taking a knife, he began to sharpen it slowly, his back to her. The fire crackled. He did not look again, as though giving her permission to eat without judgment. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She lifted the spoon, lips trembling, and took the first mouthful. Warmth flooded her, filling the hollow places. She ate slowly, quietly, trying to make each bite small, careful. The shame eased, just enough for her to taste the comfort beneath it. He turned at last, setting down the blade, and sat across from her. Their eyes met across the fire. She wanted to speak, thank him, question him, anything, but her throat closed around the words. Instead, her gaze fell to the scars across his chest. Long ridges, puckered flesh, wounds from blade and bullet both. They ran over his shoulder, down his ribs, marks of survival. For a moment, shame loosened its grip. She was not the only one who carried a body judged by others. His scars were his history, written where none could ignore them. As if he read her thoughts, he reached toward the fire, lifting a coal with iron tongs, placing it atop the wood. Sparks spiraled upward. "Dakota," he said, voice deep simple. His name, offered like flint. Her lips parted. "Chenoa," she whispered, though it came more like confession than introduction. The syllables lingered between them, fragile yet binding. He nodded once, then fell silent again, but something in the air had shifted. Two names now where before there had been none. Later, when the storm pressed harder against the walls, she busied herself tidying what little she could. Folding blankets, brushing snow from the threshold, aligning the boots by the door. He watched without interfering. Each act steadied her, giving her hands something to hold when her heart wavered. At one point, she found a woven basket tipped in the corner, spilled herbs and pine needles scattered across the floor. She knelt to gather them. Her fingers shook from cold, and one stalk slipped. She reached, only to find his hand already there, closing gently around it. Their fingers touched, rough callous against soft trembling skin. She froze. He placed the herb back into the basket, his touch deliberate, respectful, then withdrew. It was a small thing, but it echoed louder than any declaration. A man who could have commanded, yet chose instead to share in silence. That night, as the fire crackled low, she lay upon the fur bed, blankets heavy over her. He remained by the hearth, sharpening his knife, shoulders haloed by firelight. She watched him through half-closed eyes, the rise and fall of his breath steady as the pines outside. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely unwanted. Sleep tugged at her, but thoughts pressed harder. What did he want with her? Why had he chosen her before the crowd, when he could have walked past without a word? She was not beautiful by the measure of others. She was not wealthy, not skilled. And yet, here she was, beneath his roof, beneath his silence. The storm howled around the cabin, snow rattling the shutters. Within, warmth wrapped them, fragile but whole. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the sound of his steady breathing. But just before sleep claimed her, his voice carried across the dark, quiet, almost to himself. "They will come." Her eyes snapped open, heart quickening. She turned toward the firelit figure, but his gaze remained fixed on the flames, expression unreadable. His words settled into her chest like ice, a warning, a promise. And though she did not yet know who he meant, neighbors, gossips, or enemies, the truth was clear. Whatever storm waited beyond the cabin walls had only just begun. The snow relented after days of fury, leaving the world pale and hushed, as though the storm had wiped it clean for a brief, fragile moment. Chenoa stepped into the light of morning with Dakota at her side, the path to town a ribbon carved through drifts that sparkled like broken glass. Her shawl was pulled close, but warmth lingered from the fire of nights spent in the cabin, warmth that frightened her, because she feared it could not last. The settlement appeared ahead, roofs sagging beneath their weight of ice, smoke curling upward in hesitant strands. As they neared, eyes followed them. A hammer paused mid-swing. A woman ceased hanging laundry, her hands still clutching the line. Children whispered, pointing before being called inside. Silence was a cloak heavier than the snow itself. At the trading post, the air within was thick with tobacco and damp wool. Chenoa's heart rattled against her ribs as she walked behind Dakota, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. His presence filled the room, his height, his silence. He strode to the counter, set down his coins, and gestured toward the flour, salt, coffee. His voice when he spoke was low but unyielding, carrying the weight of the pines he had brought her into. But the whispers rose anyway. "That the fat one he dragged from the station? Savage'll take anything left behind. Best she can hope for." Laughter, sharp and brittle, cut through the air. Chenoa felt each word as though they were stones hurled at her chest. She shrank further into herself, wishing she could disappear into her shawl. Her hands trembled so badly, she dropped the little parcel of matches she carried. It struck the floor, scattering, and the laughter grew louder. Dakota bent to retrieve the matches, his broad frame eclipsing her from view. He placed the parcel back into her hand, his touch steady, then turned to face the room. Silence returned in an instant, heavier this time, like a blade held aloft. His eyes, dark as obsidian, passed over each man, each smirking mouth. He did not speak. He did not need to. The weight of his stare was answer enough. Coins clinked against the counter. He gathered the goods and with a simple motion, placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her out into the snow. The gesture undid her. It was nothing more than a hand, but it was warm, firm, protective. It said without words, "You belong here beside me." She blinked against sudden tears, holding them tight until the wind could dry them from her lashes. Back at the cabin, the silence was different. Not the heavy silence of gossip, but the gentle hush of fire and pine. Chenoa unpacked the goods, her hands slower than usual, distracted by the echo of laughter in her ears. She tried to hum, to chase away the sound, but her voice cracked. Later, as the sky darkened, a knock came at the door. Timid, uncertain. Dakota rose, but when he opened it, only a boy stood there, shivering in patched boots. Samuel, the orphan who lingered around the station, eyes too wide for his thin face. "They say things," Samuel muttered, not daring to meet Chenoa's eyes. "They say you're not fit to be anyone's wife. Say he took you 'cause no one else would." The boy looked stricken, guilty for repeating it, but unable to stop. I thought you should know." Chenoa's breath left her like a candle snuffed. Her chest ached, heavy with the truth she had always feared and now heard spoken from the lips of a child. She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back the sob clawing its way free. Dakota took a step toward the boy, but not in anger. He placed a hand gently on Samuel's shoulder and gave a single nod, sending him back into the snow. The boy's eyes lingered on Chenoa once more before he vanished into the dusk. Inside, silence broke. Chenoa's sobs spilled out, raw and aching. "They're right," she whispered, sinking onto the stool. "I'm not fit. I never have been. No man ever wanted me. And now I've dragged you into their scorn." Her hands covered her face, her shame pressing heavier than the storm had. Dakota stood near the hearth, watching, silent as always. He did not step forward, did not speak the denial she longed for. Instead, he vanished into the night. The door shut with a soft thud, leaving her alone with her tears and the hiss of firewood collapsing into ash. Hours passed. Fear churned through her. That he would not return, that she had been abandoned as before. She curled upon the bed, clutching her shawl, listening to the storm rise again, her mind a chorus of cruel laughter. Then the door opened. Snow swirled in, and Dakota entered, his hair heavy with frost, hands rough and scraped from the cold. In his grasp was a bundle. Delicate wildflowers, brittle with ice, their colors muted but still alive beneath the frost. He set them on the table without a word. Chenoa rose slowly, her breath caught. Her fingers brushed the petals, trembling as the ice melted against her warmth. Flowers in winter, fragile yet enduring. He had gone into the storm to bring her proof that beauty could survive where none believed it could. Her tears spilled anew, but these were different, softer, carrying not just pain but something like hope. She lifted her gaze to him, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why?" He met her eyes, steady, unflinching. No words came, yet in the silence between them, she felt the answer settle into her chest. "Because you are worth more than what they say." The firelight trembled, throwing their shadows long against the walls. She reached for the flowers, pressing them close as though they were her heart itself. For the first time, she felt the cruel words from town falter, lose their sharpness, unable to stand against the simple defiance of his gesture. The storm outside deepened, rattling the cabin, but inside, a fragile bond took root. She had been mocked, scorned, rejected, yet here was proof that someone would walk into the snow for her dignity. Still, unease lingered. The whispers had not ended. They had only grown quieter, waiting, gathering like storm clouds at the edge of the pines. She could feel them pressing closer, the promise of confrontation yet to come. And as she turned back toward Dakota, clutching the flowers, she saw in his eyes the truth he had spoken before. They will come. The storm had stilled to a brittle quiet. The snow laid thick as wool over the world, muffling even the sound of breath. Chenoa sat by the fire, the wilted wildflowers still on the table before her, their stems curled, their petals faint but enduring. She touched them often, as if to remind herself they had truly been brought to her. The silence of the cabin had become almost tender, the crackle of logs their only witness. Yet beneath that calm, something pressed heavy, an unease Dakota carried in his eyes each time he glanced toward the door. When the knock came, it was not timid. The wood shuddered beneath the strike. Then another, harder, and a voice followed, sharp as a knife. "Open up, savage! We know she's in there." Chenoa froze, her breath caught like a bird in a snare. Dakota rose slowly, his broad shoulders casting the fire into shadow. He opened the door with neither haste nor fear, and the cold swept in. On the threshold stood Jedediah Cole, broad-shouldered, mean-eyed, his coat dusted white, and behind him a knot of men, their boots crunching in the snow, their mouths twisted with drink and scorn. Jedediah's gaze slid past Dakota to find Chenoa. His laugh was thick, cruel. "There she is. Fat and useless, tucked away in an Indian's den. Best he could do, I reckon." The men laughed with him, a chorus of bile that turned the air sour. Chenoa's skin burned though the air was frozen. She tried to shrink behind Dakota, but shame flooded her all the same. Every insult she had ever heard seemed to rise again, louder, heavier, made flesh in their voices. Dakota stepped forward, bare chest against the cold, his hand gripping the axe that leaned by the door. He said nothing at first, only stood with the fire at his back, the storm at his front, as though he were the boundary between two worlds. Jedediah spat into the snow. "You think you can keep her here? She don't belong to you. Hell, she don't belong to anyone. Best thing for a cow like that is to be sent along. Let some wagon train feed off her cooking till she drops." The laughter swelled again, but Dakota's voice cut through it, low, steady, carrying the weight of iron. "She stays." The words rang out into the night, simple as stone. One of the men stepped forward, fists balled. "You don't get to say what stays and what goes, Apache." He lunged, but Dakota moved faster, the haft of his axe striking the man's chest, knocking him back into the snow. The others bristled, hands twitching toward belts, yet none drew steel. The sight of Dakota, shirtless in the snow, muscles coiled, eyes dark with fire, held them. Inside, the flames snapped, painting the walls with frantic shadows. Chenoa's hands clutched her shawl, her heart slamming against her ribs. She had thought she knew shame, but this was worse. Being fought over, mocked before witnesses, her worth reduced to laughter and cruelty. Yet beneath that pain flickered something else. The staggering realization that Dakota was willing to stand against all of them, not for pride, but for her. Jedediah sneered, though his voice wavered. "What do you want her for, eh? She's nothing. Less than nothing." Dakota's gaze did not leave him. He stepped forward, until his breath steamed between them, until Jedediah faltered, boots slipping slightly in the drift. "She is mine," Dakota said, his voice as cold as the snow, as final as thunder. The men shifted uneasily. The fire inside seemed to swell at his words, throwing golden light across Chenoa's face, across the scars on his chest. Something broke in the air then, not the fight, but the spirit of it. They would not take her. They could not. Jedediah cursed under his breath, spittle freezing on his beard. He backed away a step, then another. "This ain't over," he muttered. "The town won't stand for it." But his voice lacked the sharpness it carried before. One by one, the men turned, their boots crunching in retreat, their laughter gone. Only silence and the storm remained. Dakota closed the door, the latch clicking softly. He leaned the axe back against the wall, his breath still heavy, his chest heaving with the cold he had stood against. Chenoa could not move. She could only watch him, every scar, every line of him, burned by firelight into her memory. When at last she rose, her knees trembled. She crossed to him, hands unsure, heart loud. He did not step back when she reached out. Her fingers touched his chest, tracing the fresh bruise where the fight had brushed him. His skin was hot despite the storm. Her voice broke when it came. "Why do you do this for me?" His eyes found hers. They were not soft, not tender. They were fierce, unyielding, yet behind them lived something deeper, something she had never seen turned upon her. "Because you are worth keeping." Her breath shuddered, her hand trembling against him. Worth keeping. Not mocked, not discarded, not less than nothing. The word struck deeper than any blow. She bowed her head, and her tears fell silently onto his chest. He lifted her chin, not with force but with gentleness, making her meet his gaze. The fire glowed between them, a fragile bond forged in defiance of every cruel voice outside. She whispered, "They'll come again." His mouth did not smile, but his voice was steady. "Then I will stand again." For a long time they stood like that, the storm pressing at the walls, the fire pressing against the dark. Her shame had not vanished, but it had shifted, tempered by his refusal to yield. For the first time, she felt a strength not born from hiding, but from being seen. The flames burned low. She guided him to the stool, her fingers shaking as she pressed cloth against the scrape on his arm. He watched her, unblinking, as though each touch was more dangerous than the men he had faced. Her hands lingered longer than they should have, and when she looked up, their eyes met with something unspoken but undeniable. The cabin breathed around them, wood groaning, fire sighing, storm whispering through cracks. Every sound felt charged, fragile. Chenoa's heart beat against her ribs, as though testing the space between them. She wanted to say more, to ask if this strange bond born of storm and shame, was real, or if it would vanish with dawn. But before she could speak, his hand closed gently over hers, holding it where it pressed to his wound. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was alive, trembling with the weight of what had not yet been said. And in that stillness, as the snow piled higher against the door, Chenoa understood that the world outside would not relent, that the town, the whispers, the cruelty, would come again, harder, louder. But here, in the firelight, she had found something that might endure. The storm passed in the night, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. The pines bowed low beneath their frosted crowns, the snow glimmered like crushed diamonds, and the sky stretched pale and endless, as though waiting for something to be written upon it. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, but its warmth lingered in the timbers, in the breath that hung between two souls who had not yet spoken of what had already been sealed in silence. Chenoa rose before dawn, her heart heavy with a decision she had not voiced but could no longer keep from herself. She dressed quietly, pulling her shawl close, and placed her hand upon her trunk. The flowers Dakota had brought her lay dried now on the table, their petals fragile but intact, as though even in death they refused to be destroyed. She pressed them into her palm, a keepsake, before lifting the latch. Her boots sank deep into the snow. The cold clung to her, sharp as regret. Behind her, the cabin was still, the faint glow of embers flickering in the window. Each step away felt like the tearing of cloth, soundless yet absolute. She told herself it was mercy, that leaving would spare him the burden of defending a woman the town would never accept, a woman who had always been mocked, never wanted. Better to go quietly into nothing than to tether him to shame. She had gone only a dozen paces when the door opened. His voice cut across the silence, low and certain. "Chenoa." She froze, snow swirling around her like smoke. Slowly, she turned. Dakota stood in the doorway, bare against the cold, his breath rising in pale clouds. He did not move toward her, only stood as though the earth itself had placed him there to block her path. His eyes held no question, no hesitation. Only truth. Her lips parted, trembling. "I cannot stay. They will come again. They will tear us apart." He stepped forward then, each stride sinking into the snow, his presence filling the space between them until there was nowhere left to run. When he reached her, he did not seize her hand nor her arm. Instead, he lifted something from around his neck, a cord of leather, strung with a single carved piece of bone, smoothed by years of wear. Without a word, he placed it over her head. The weight of it settled against her chest, warm from his skin, carrying with it the scent of pine, smoke, and earth. She touched it with trembling fingers, understanding without needing explanation. This was no trinket. This was a vow. His voice rumbled low, steady, each word like a stone laid into the foundation of something larger than either of them. "My wife." The world tilted. She could not breathe, could not move. Tears burned her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Dakota! He lifted her chin with a hand both rough and tender, making her meet his gaze. No more shame, he said. No more leaving. The snow fell softer now, flakes drifting slow as feathers around them. She pressed her hand to the bone charm, then to his chest, feeling the heat of his skin, the steadiness of his heart. The fight of the night before, the whispers, the cruel laughter, all of it seemed distant, unworthy of the silence that wrapped around them now. And then, through the trees, a small figure appeared. Samuel, the boy, trudging through the drifts with wide eyes. He stopped when he saw them, breathless, his face bright with something he could not yet name. He said nothing, only stood as a witness, his innocence sealing what words could not. Dakota's arm encircled Chenoa, drawing her close, shielding her from the cold as though it were no more than wind. He spoke then in his own tongue, words Chenoa did not understand, but felt as surely as the ground beneath her feet. His voice was low, reverent, carrying into the silence of the pines. A vow not meant for the ears of men, but for the spirits that lingered in snow and stone. When he finished, he bowed his head, waiting. She pressed her forehead to his chest, tears wetting his skin, and whispered in broken breath, "Yes. Yes, I am yours." The snow began to fall heavier, not in fury but in blessing, wrapping them in a veil that hid the world beyond. Samuel, still watching, smiled faintly, as though he too understood that something greater had taken place. They stood there, husband and wife, without altar, without preacher, without town. The forest, the storm, and the child were their witnesses. The fire that bound them was not lit by words, but by the small, steady acts that had carried them to this moment. The food placed before her, the flowers carried through the storm, the hand upon her back in the face of laughter, the silence that gave her dignity when none else had. Chenoa felt something shift within her, a weight she had carried all her life loosening, breaking apart. She was not the shame they had said she was. She was not unworthy. She was not left behind. Here in the snow she was chosen, not in spite of who she was, but wholly, completely, because of it. Dakota pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against the cold, and for a long moment there was nothing but the rhythm of their hearts, the storm enfolding them like a hymn. Behind them, the cabin waited, its smoke curling once more into the sky, its fire ready to welcome them home. Ahead lay the town, the whispers, the eyes that would not soften. But for the first time, she felt no fear of them. As Dakota led her back toward the door, his arm firm around her, Samuel followed, leaving small tracks beside their larger ones. The boy's presence was wordless promise. Even the smallest would carry forward what they had seen. That dignity could be reclaimed, that shame could be broken, that love could be born in silence and in fire alike. When the door shut behind them, the storm howled once more, but the sound no longer pierced her. It was only wind. She pressed the bone charm against her heart, holding it as though it were part of her now, and looked at him across the fire's glow. He met her gaze, scarred and unyielding, and for the first time she smiled. Not with doubt, not with fear, but with certainty. And if the town came again, if the whispers grew into shouts, she knew the truth now. She would not walk away. For she had been found. And she had been kept.